For nearly 1,000 years, Rome was the center of the world. Its legions were unstoppable, its engineering was legendary, and its influence stretched across 3 continents. From the sun-scorched sands of Egypt to the misty shores of Britain. All roads led to Rome. But how did this colossal empire, the very definition of power and permanence, ultimately crumble into dust? What cataclysmic forces could bring such a giant to its knees? Today, we're diving deep into one of history's greatest mysteries, the fall of the Western Roman Empire. It's a story of ambition, betrayal, chaos, and a perfect storm of crises that converge to extinguish the eternal city's light. So grab your gear, fellow history buffs, because we're about to travel back in time to witness the final dramatic days of Rome. First, let's set the stage. By the 3rd century AD, Rome was no longer the stable powerhouse of Augustus or Trajan. The empire was teetering on the brink, gripped by what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century. Imagine this. In just 50 years, Rome had over 20 different emperors. Most of them met a violent end. This wasn't just political instability, it was a revolving door of generals and usurpers, each carving out their own piece of the empire. Civil war became the norm, not the exception. Legions, once dedicated to defending the borders, were now marching on Rome itself, fighting other Romans for power and plunder. This constant infighting drained the treasury, devastated the countryside, and left the frontiers dangerously exposed. The very foundation of Roman-powered military might was now tearing the empire apart from the inside. As if endless civil war wasn't enough, a silent killer was also stalking the empire. Disease, waves of plague, like the plague of Cyprian, swept through the population, leaving death and devastation in their wake. We're talking about mortality rates that are hard to even imagine today. Entire towns were wiped out, and the population of the empire may have plummeted by as much as a third. This had a catastrophic domino effect. Fewer people meant fewer farmers to grow food, leading to widespread famine. It meant fewer taxpayers to fill the state's empty coffers and, crucially, fewer able-bodied men to serve in the legions. The Roman war machine, which had always relied on a deep well of manpower, was suddenly running on empty. They were forced to find soldiers wherever they could, a decision that would have profound consequences. With the empire weakened by internal strife and disease, the wolves began to circle. Along the Rhine and Danube rivers, groups the Romans dismissed as barbarians were growing stronger and more organized. The Goths, Vandals, Franks, and countless other tribes saw an opportunity. For centuries, Rome had either conquered, assimilated, or pushed these groups back. But now the roles were reversing. These weren't just simple raids anymore. They were mass migrations and full-scale invasions. Entire peoples were on the move, pushed by climate change, internal conflicts, and the terrifying advance of the Huns from the east. The Roman borders, once an impenetrable shield, were now porous. The pressure was relentless, a constant drumbeat of attacks from all sides that the overstretched and exhausted legions simply couldn't handle. Faced with a critical soldier shortage, Roman emperors made a fateful decision. They began hiring the very barbarians they were fighting to defend the empire. These soldiers, known as foederati, were entire tribes who fought under their own chieftains in exchange for land and gold. On the surface, it seemed like a clever solution. But in reality, it was a deal with the devil. These foederati had little loyalty to the abstract idea of Rome. Their allegiance was to their commander and to the promise of payment. When the paychecks stopped, which they often did, as the economy collapsed, their loyalty vanished. Essentially, Rome was outsourcing its own defense to armies that could, and often did, turn against it. It was like hiring a wolf to guard the henhouse. This policy hollowed out the Roman army from within, transforming it into a patchwork of mercenary bands with competing agendas. So you have political chaos, plague, and constant invasions. What else went wrong? The economy was in a death spiral. To pay for the massive army and a bloated bureaucracy, emperors resorted to desperate measures. They debased the currency, mixing precious metals like silver with cheaper metals like copper. A denarius that was once nearly pure silver became little more than a silver-washed piece of junk. Predictably, this led to hyperinflation. People lost faith in the money. Prices soared, trade ground to a halt, and the complex, interconnected economy of the Mediterranean world shattered. Wealthy landowners retreated to their fortified country villas, which became self-sufficient little kingdoms, further eroding the central government's authority and tax base. For the average Roman citizen, life became a desperate struggle for survival. By the early 5th century, the situation was dire. In 410 AD, the unthinkable happened. For the first time in 800 years, the city of Rome itself was sacked. The Visigoths, led by their king Alaric, breached the walls and plundered the city for 3 days. While Rome was no longer the political capital, it was still the symbolic heart of the empire. Its fall sent a shockwave across the Roman world. It was a psychological blow from which the empire would never recover. How could the eternal city, the center of civilization, be violated by barbarians? For many, it felt like the end of the world. And in a way, it was. The sack of Rome was a clear signal that the Western Empire was no longer invincible. Its aura of divine protection had been shattered forever. After the sack of Rome, the Western Empire entered its final, agonizing death throes. The provinces fell away one by one. Britain was abandoned. Gaul was overrun by Franks, Burgundians, and Visigoths. Spain was lost. And North Africa, the breadbasket of the empire, was conquered by the Vandals, cutting off Rome's critical grain supply. The empire was reduced to little more than Italy itself, and even that was under constant threat. The central government had lost all effective control. Power was now in the hands of powerful barbarian generals, the so-called masters of the soldiers, who appointed and deposed puppet emperors at will. The Roman emperor became a mere figurehead, a pawn in the games of these warlords. The final act came in for 76 AD, a Germanic chieftain named Odoacer, leading a revolt of foederati troops demanding land in Italy, deposed the last Western Roman emperor. His name, ironically, was Romulus Augustulus, a pathetic echo of Rome's founder and its first great emperor. But unlike the usurpers before him, Odoacer didn't bother to appoint another puppet. He simply sent the imperial insignia, the symbols of power, to the Eastern Roman emperor in Constantinople, declaring that one emperor was enough. And just like that, with a whimper rather than a bang, the Western Roman Empire ceased to exist. There was no final epic battle. 'Twas simply a recognition of a reality that had been true for decades. The empire was already gone. So, was there one single reason for Rome's fall? Historians today agree that it was a complex process, a perfect storm of interconnected problems. It was a slow, creeping decay caused by internal rot, political instability, economic collapse, and social change that made the empire vulnerable to external shocks like invasions and plagues. There was no single mortal wound, but rather 1,000 cuts that eventually bled the giant dry. The fall of Rome wasn't an event. It was a process that unfolded over generations. It serves as a powerful lesson from history, that even the mightiest empires are not permanent, and that complex societies can unravel when their foundations are weakened from within. The legacy of Rome, however, did not die in 476. In the East, the Roman Empire, which we now call the Byzantine Empire, would endure for another 1,000 years, preserving Roman law, culture, and knowledge. And even in the West, the ghost of Rome lived on. The Latin language evolved into French, Spanish, and Italian. The Catholic Church, based in Rome, became the dominant spiritual and cultural force in Europe. Roman law provided the foundation for many modern legal systems. The idea of Rome, of a universal civilized empire, would haunt the imaginations of European rulers for centuries to come, from Charlemagne to Napoleon. The eagles may have fallen, but their shadow still stretches over our world today. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the twilight of the Roman Empire. It's a fascinating and complex topic, and we've only scratched the surface. What do you think was the most important factor in Rome's collapse? Let me know your theories in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video and want to explore more of history's greatest stories, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us create more content for you. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.